The applause thundered around me as I walked across the stage, my burgundy cap slightly askew from the June breeze. Columbia University's graduation ceremony was everything I dreamed it would be, except for the glaring empty seats in Section C, where my family should have been sitting. I adjusted my grip on the diploma cover, forcing my smile to stay bright as cameras flashed from every direction. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name echoed through the speakers. Samantha Charlotte Brennan, Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering, summa cum laude. The dean's handshake was firm, his congratulations genuine. But all I could think about was how Mom had sounded on the phone 3 days ago when I'd reminded her about today. "Oh, honey, you know how busy things are with the restaurant renovation. Your father's pulling 18-hour days, and I'm drowning in permit applications. You understand, right? You've always been so independent." Independent. Their favorite word for me since I was 12 and started making my own school lunches because they forgot to grocery shop. Independent when I took 3 buses to get to my SAT prep classes. Independent when I worked 2 jobs to help pay for textbooks while my younger brother Marcus got a brand new car for his 16th birthday. I descended the stage steps, my heels clicking against the temporary flooring. Other graduates were immediately swarmed by proud parents, grandparents with bouquets, little siblings jumping up and down with excitement. I pulled out my phone, half hoping for a last-minute message, but there was nothing, not even from Marcus, who was probably sleeping off another fraternity party at State. "Samantha!" a voice called from behind me. I turned to see my roommate Jessica weaving through the crowd, her own family in tow. "Come get in our pictures, my mom insists." Mrs. Chen wrapped me in a hug that smelled like jasmine perfume and motherly warmth. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Where are your parents? I was hoping to finally meet them." Heat crept up my neck. "They couldn't make it. Work emergency." Jessica's younger sister, Emma, all of 14 and brutally honest, wrinkled her nose. "On graduation day? That's messed up." "Emma," Jessica hissed, but I could see the concern in her eyes too. We'd been roommates for 2 years, and she'd witnessed enough phone calls to know the pattern. After photos and congratulations, I found myself walking alone toward the campus gates, my diploma holder tucked under my arm. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quadrangle, and for a moment, I felt the full weight of this transition. 4 years of studying, interning, pushing myself to excel, and now what? I had a job lined up at an environmental consulting firm in Denver, a studio apartment waiting, a whole new life ahead of me. But standing here in my graduation gown with no one to share it with felt hollow. That's when I saw her. Aunt Miranda was leaning against a black sedan parked just outside the main gates, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She looked exactly like she had at Christmas 2 years ago, the last time I'd seen her, elegant in that effortless way that made expensive clothes look casual. When she spotted me, her face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made the corners crinkle. "There's my brilliant niece," she called out, pushing off from the car and walking toward me, with arms outstretched. I practically ran to her, not caring if I looked undignified in my graduation regalia. Her hug was fierce and lasted long enough for me to catch the familiar scent of her perfume, something French and sophisticated that she'd worn for as long as I could remember. "Aunt Miranda, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Seattle." "I flew in this morning. Did you really think I'd miss your graduation?" She held me at arm's length, looking me up and down with obvious pride. "Look at you! Environmental engineering, top of your class? Your grandmother would have been so proud." My throat tightened at the mention of Grandma Rose, who'd passed away when I was 15. She'd always believed in me, always made time for my science fair projects and school presentations, even when my parents were too busy with their restaurant. "Mom and Dad didn't tell me you were coming." Something flickered across Miranda's face. Annoyance, maybe, or disappointment. Well, I wanted it to be a surprise. Speaking of which, I have something for you. She led me back to the sedan and popped the trunk, pulling out an elegantly wrapped box about the size of a shoebox. The paper was cream-colored with a silver ribbon, and it felt substantial in her hands. You didn't have to get me anything. Nonsense. This is a special day. She gestured toward a nearby bench. Open it now. I want to see your face. I settled onto the bench, carefully untying the ribbon. Inside the box, nestled in white tissue paper, was an antique wooden jewelry box with intricate carved roses on the lid. It was beautiful, clearly vintage, with tiny brass hinges that gleamed in the afternoon light. It's gorgeous, Aunt Miranda. Thank you. Open it, she said softly, sitting beside me. The lid lifted with a soft creak, revealing a red velvet interior. But instead of jewelry, there was a single folded document, heavy paper, official-looking, with what appeared to be a seal at the bottom. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The header read, "Warranty Deed," in formal script, and below that, an address I didn't recognize, 247 Maple Creek Lane, Millbrook, New York. But what made my breath catch were the names listed under grantee. Property hereby conveyed to Rose Elizabeth Brennan and Miranda Catherine Brennan as joint tenants with right of survivorship. I read it twice, then looked up at Miranda in confusion. I don't understand. This has your name on it, and Grandma's, but Grandma died 5 years ago. Miranda's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught something in her eyes. A flicker of pain, maybe, or regret. That property became mine when she passed. It's a little house upstate, about 2 hours from the city. Nothing fancy, but it has good bones. Why are you showing me this? She reached over and gently turned the document over. On the back, in my grandmother's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For Samantha's future, when she's ready to know the truth. R.E.B." My heart started beating faster. What truth? Aunt Miranda, what is this about? She was quiet for a long moment, watching students and families stream past us on the sidewalk. Finally, she spoke. Your grandmother left that house to you, Samantha. She made me promise to give you the deed when you graduated college. Left it to me? But why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't Mom and Dad? I trailed off, a cold realization starting to form in my stomach. They know about the house, Miranda said quietly. They've known all along. I stared down at the deed, my hands shaking now. What do you mean they've known? Know what, exactly? Miranda stood up, smoothing down her skirt. I think that's a conversation you need to have with them. But Samantha, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, your grandmother loved you more than anything in this world. She wanted to make sure you had options, a place that was truly yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She kissed my forehead, the same way she used to when I was little, and started walking back toward her car. Wait, I called after her. Aunt Miranda, I don't understand any of this. Why all the secrecy? Why now? She paused with her hand on the car door. Because you're not a child anymore, Samantha. You're educated, independent, strong enough to handle whatever comes next. Her smile was sad but proud. And because some promises can't be broken, no matter how complicated they make things. I watched her drive away, leaving me sitting on that bench with a property deed I didn't understand and questions that felt too big for my newly graduated brain to process. The campus was emptying around me, families heading to celebration dinners, graduates making plans for the evening. I pulled out my phone and dialed home, my heart hammering as it rang. Samantha, honey? Mom's voice was bright, artificially cheerful. How did the ceremony go? I hope you took lots of pictures. It was fine, Mom. Listen, I need to ask you something. Do you know anything about a house in Millbrook? Something about Grandma Rose? The silence on the other end stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Mom's voice came back, but all the warmth had drained out of it. Where did you hear about that? Aunt Miranda was here. She gave me a deed. Another pause. Then I heard muffled voices in the background. Mom talking to someone else, her hand probably covering the phone. When she came back, her tone was completely different.
Samantha, honey, you need to come home, right now. Don't talk to anyone else about this, okay? There are things you don't understand, complicated legal things. Just come home and we'll explain everything. The line went dead. I sat there, holding my phone, the deed still clutched in my other hand, as the late afternoon sun cast longer and longer shadows across the empty campus. Whatever truth my grandmother had left,
Dad, can you at least tell me why everyone's acting like I just inherited nuclear codes instead of information about a house? Not here, Samantha. When we get home, your mother will explain everything. But when we pulled into our driveway, it wasn't just Mom waiting on the front porch. Marcus was there too, which was strange because he usually didn't come home from college until summer break officially started. He was sitting on the porch swing, looking uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. My younger brother was typically confident, to the point of cockiness, but right now, he looked like a kid who'd been caught cheating on a test. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" He stood up quickly, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Mom called me, said there was a family emergency." A family emergency? That's what they were calling my grandmother's gift. Mom appeared in the doorway before I could respond, and I was shocked by how frazzled she looked. Her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans, definitely not her typical put-together appearance. "Come inside, sweetheart. We have a lot to discuss." The living room felt different somehow, charged with tension I could practically taste. Mom gestured for me to sit on the couch, while Dad remained standing by the fireplace. Marcus chose the chair farthest from everyone else, still looking like he'd rather be anywhere but here. "First things first," Mom said, settling into her favorite armchair. "Let me see the deed." I hesitated. Something about the way she said it, like I was a child being asked to hand over a toy I'd stolen, rubbed me the wrong way. "Why?" "Samantha, please, just let us see it." Reluctantly, I pulled the folded document from my purse and handed it over. Mom's hands were actually shaking as she unfolded it, and I watched her face go through a series of expressions: surprise, then what looked like relief, then something that might have been anger. "Thank God," she breathed. "It's the original." "The original what? Mom, you're scaring me." Dad moved closer, reading over Mom's shoulder. "Miranda actually kept her word," he muttered, and there was something bitter in his voice. "Will someone please explain what's going on?" I was starting to lose patience with all the cryptic comments and significant looks. Mom folded the deed carefully and held it in her lap, her knuckles white. "Your grandmother owned that house jointly with Miranda, just like the deed says. When she died, it should have passed to Miranda completely." "Okay, but the note on the back says it was meant for me." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What he wanted me to know, it was clear that my parents had spent 5 years making sure I never found out. But now I had questions, and for the first time in my life, I had the education and independence to find my own answers. The train ride back to Westchester felt like the longest 3 hours of my life. I kept staring at the property deed, reading and rereading every word, trying to piece together what I was missing. The house was valued at $340,000, according to the document. Not a fortune, but definitely not pocket change either. More importantly, it was dated just 6 months before Grandma Rose died, which meant she'd been planning this for a while. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd hung up with Mom. Text after text, each one more urgent than the last. "Please just come straight home. Don't stop anywhere. Your father is beside himself. We need to talk face to face. Samantha, this is bigger than you realize. Trust us." Trust them? The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years of trusting them to tell me the truth about my grandmother's estate, and apparently they'd been lying the entire time. When the train pulled into Hartsdale Station, I could see Dad's truck in the parking lot before I even stepped off the platform. He was pacing beside it, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand running through his graying hair the way it did when he was stressed about the restaurant's finances. "She's here," he said into the phone as soon as he spotted me. "Yeah, I see her. We'll be home in 10 minutes." The drive to our house was uncomfortably silent. Dad kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his jaw clenched tight. I'd seen this expression before, usually when suppliers were late or when the health inspector showed up unannounced. It was his crisis management face. "That's the problem," Dad said, finally sitting down on the arm of Mom's chair. "Your grandmother had no legal right to promise you that house. It wasn't entirely hers to give." I felt like I was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But Miranda gave me the deed. If she owns it now, can't she give it to whoever she wants? The look that passed between my parents was loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he spoke up. "There's something else, Sam. Something about Mom and Aunt Miranda." "Marcus," Mom said sharply, "let me handle this." "No, she deserves to know the truth." Marcus leaned forward, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Mom and Aunt Miranda haven't spoken in 5 years, not since Grandma Rose died." This was news to me. I thought back to Christmas 2 years ago when Miranda had been at our house. But she was here for Christmas, I remember. "That was 3 years ago," Mom corrected quietly, "and it was the last time she set foot in this house." "Why? What happened?" Dad rubbed his forehead like he was fighting a headache. "They had a falling out over your grandmother's will. Miranda felt that your mother should have inherited more than she did. She accused us of taking advantage of an elderly woman." "Taking advantage of how?" The silence stretched long enough for me to realize this was the heart of whatever they'd been hiding. Mom's hands were twisting in her lap, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your grandmother was confused toward the end," she finally said. "The medications she was on, they affected her judgment. She made some decisions that weren't in her best interest." "What kind of decisions?" "She gave us money," Marcus said bluntly, ignoring Mom's sharp look. "A lot of money. For Dad's restaurant expansion, for my college tuition, for your education fund. Miranda thought we were manipulating her." I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. "How much money?" "Samantha, that's not important." "How much, Mom?" Dad answered instead. "About $200,000 over the course of 3 years." The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000. No wonder Miranda had accused them of taking advantage. No wonder she'd stopped speaking to them. "So, when Grandma Rose wrote that note about the house being for me, she was trying to make up for the money she'd already given us," Mom finished. "But legally, she couldn't promise you something that wasn't entirely hers, and Miranda knew that." I stood up abruptly, needing to pace. This was so much bigger than a simple inheritance issue. "So, why did Miranda give me the deed today? If she thought you took advantage of Grandma, why would she honor something that was legally questionable?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Dad said. "Miranda isn't exactly known for her generosity, especially toward this family." "Maybe she feels guilty," Marcus suggested. "Maybe she realized Mom and Dad weren't actually doing anything wrong." But something about that didn't sit right with me. Miranda hadn't seemed guilty when she'd handed me the deed. She'd seemed determined, purposeful, like she was settling an old score. I walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd waited for school buses, where I'd lived my entire life without knowing there were family secrets this big brewing under the surface. "There's something you're not telling me," I said. "Miranda didn't just decide to give me this house out of the blue. Something changed. Something made her think now was the right time." When I turned back to face my family, their expressions confirmed my suspicion. They knew exactly why Miranda had chosen today, and they were terrified for me to find out. "What happened?" I asked.
What changed? Mom and Dad exchanged another one of those loaded looks, and I could see them having an entire conversation with their eyes. Finally, Mom spoke. Your grandmother's lawyer called Miranda last week. There's been a development with the estate. What kind of development? Someone's been asking questions, official questions, about the money transfers, about the house, about whether your grandmother was competent when she made those decisions. The room felt like it was spinning. Someone like who? Dad's voice was grim when he answered. The state attorney general's office. They're investigating whether your grandmother was the victim of elder financial abuse. And suddenly I understood why my family was terrified, why Miranda had chosen today to give me the deed, and why everyone was acting like my college graduation had somehow triggered a time bomb that had been ticking for 5 years. The words elder financial abuse hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything I thought I knew about my family. I sank back down onto the couch, my legs suddenly unsteady.
You're being investigated for abusing Grandma Rose? We're not being investigated, Dad said quickly. Not yet. It's a preliminary inquiry. Someone filed a complaint, and they're required to look into it. Someone like Miranda? Mom's laugh was sharp and bitter. Miranda wouldn't go to the authorities. She'd handle this her own way, which apparently involves dragging you into the middle of it. I looked down at the deed again, seeing it with completely new eyes. This wasn't a graduation gift. This was ammunition. Miranda had handed me a loaded weapon without telling me what I was supposed to do with it. But I still don't understand. If there's an investigation, wouldn't giving me the house make things worse? Wouldn't it look like you're all trying to hide assets or something? Marcus shifted in his chair. Not if the house was already promised to you before Grandma died. If Miranda formally transfers it to you now, it looks like she's just honoring Grandma's wishes, not trying to hide anything from investigators. For someone who spent most of his time playing video games and avoiding family drama, my brother had a surprisingly clear grasp of the legal implications. How do you know all this? Because I've been living with this hanging over our heads for months, he said, running his hands through his dark hair. Ever since that social worker showed up asking questions about Grandma's final years. A social worker came here? This was the first I was hearing about any of this. In March, Mom said quietly, she wanted to know about Grandma's mental state, about the money transfers, about whether we'd had any financial difficulties that might have motivated us to pressure her for help. And what did you tell her? The truth, Dad said firmly, that your grandmother was sharp as a tack until the day she died. She offered to help with the restaurant because she wanted to see it succeed. That she insisted on paying for Marcus's college because she said education was the best investment she could make. And my education fund? Mom's voice got softer. She set that up when you were in high school. She said she wanted to make sure you had the same opportunities as Marcus, that you wouldn't have to struggle the way she did when she was young. I felt a pang of grief mixed with confusion. Grandma Rose had always been generous, but this level of financial support was something I'd never imagined. $200,000 was more money than my parents had probably saved in their entire lives. So who filed the complaint? If it wasn't Miranda, who would even know about the money transfers? The look that passed between my parents was different this time. Less secretive, more guilty. We think it might have been Mrs. Petrosky, Mom finally admitted. Mrs. Petrosky? Grandma Rose's next-door neighbor for 30 years and one of the biggest gossips in Millbrook. She was the kind of woman who kept track of everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing her opinions. Why would she care about Grandma's finances? Because she was there the day we picked up the check for Marcus's tuition, Dad said. She saw your grandmother hand me an envelope with $25,000 in cash, and she heard Grandma say something about how family comes first, no matter what. I tried to picture the scene. Mrs. Petrosky was notoriously nosy, the type who would definitely be watching from her kitchen window when visitors came and went. If she'd witnessed what looked like a substantial cash transfer, especially if my grandmother had seemed confused or pressured, What exactly did she see that made her think something was wrong? Marcus answered this time. Grandma was having one of her bad days. You remember how she got sometimes in those last few months. She'd be perfectly clear one minute, then confused next. Mrs. Petrovsky apparently heard her ask Dad 3 times who he was before she handed him the money. My stomach dropped. I did remember those episodes. Grandma Rose would seem completely normal, then suddenly act like she didn't recognize familiar faces or couldn't remember conversations we'd just had. The doctors had said it was a side effect of her new blood pressure medication, that it would stabilize once her body adjusted. But she did recognize him, right? She knew she was giving money to her son-in-law. Of course she did, Mom said defensively. She was just having a foggy moment. It happens sometimes, but it never lasted long. The problem is, Dad continued, Mrs. Petrovsky only saw that one interaction. She didn't see the hour we spent beforehand talking about Marcus's college plans, or the way Grandma insisted on celebrating with champagne afterward. I was starting to understand the scope of what my family was facing. Even if they'd done nothing wrong, the optics were terrible. An elderly woman with documented periods of confusion handing over large sums of money to family members who had financial pressures. From the outside, it could easily look like exploitation. So the state is investigating based on one neighbor's complaint about one incident? Not just one incident, Mom said reluctantly. Mrs. Petrovsky apparently kept a journal of everything she observed over the last few years of Grandma's life. Every time we visited, every time contractors came to the house, every time Grandma seemed confused or upset. She kept a journal? I couldn't hide my disbelief. Like surveillance notes? More like concerned observations, Dad said, though his tone suggested he found it just as creepy as I did. According to the social worker, Mrs. Petrovsky documented several occasions when she thought Grandma seemed distressed after our visits. I thought back to those final years, trying to remember anything that might have seemed suspicious to an outside observer. Dad had been renovating Grandma's kitchen as a surprise for her 80th birthday. Marcus had been doing yard work to earn spending money. I'd been helping her organize old photo albums and family documents. Wait, I said, a new thought occurring to me. If Mrs. Petrovsky was watching everything so closely, wouldn't she have seen Miranda visiting too? The silence that followed was answer enough. Miranda stopped visiting regularly after the first big money transfer, Mom admitted. She thought we were asking for too much, too often. She said we were taking advantage of Grandma's generosity. So Mrs. Petrovsky's journal probably shows our family visiting all the time, accepting money and gifts, while Miranda, the responsible family member, stayed away because she was concerned about exploitation. That's exactly how it looks, Marcus said grimly. And now that there's an official investigation, Miranda suddenly decides to honor Grandma's wishes about the house. It makes her look like a noble family member trying to do right by Grandma's memory. I stood up again, needing to move. The walls of our living room felt like they were closing in. So I'm what exactly? A pawn in whatever game Miranda's playing with the investigation? We don't know what Miranda's endgame is, Dad said, but the timing isn't a coincidence. She could have given you that deed at any point in the last 5 years. She chose today for a reason. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt my blood run cold. The message was from an unknown number. Congratulations on your graduation, Samantha. I think it's time we met to discuss your grandmother's true wishes. There's more to the story than your parents have told you. A friend of Rose's. I showed the text to my family and watched all the color drain from Mom's face. They're trying to get to you, she whispered. They want to use you to build their case against us. Who's they? I demanded. Who is this from? Dad was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling our lawyer. This has gone too far. But as I stared at the mysterious text, a different thought occurred to me. What if whoever sent this message was right? What if there really was more to the story than my parents had told me? What if the investigation wasn't just about money transfers and confused elderly neighbors? What if there were secrets buried deeper than anyone was willing to admit? And what if Miranda hadn't given me the deed to make me a pawn, but to make me a player in a game I didn't even know I was supposed to be playing?
While Dad frantically dialed our family lawyer, I found myself staring at that mysterious text message, reading it over and over. A friend of Rose's. Not a friend of your grandmother's, or someone who knew Rose. The familiar use of her first name suggested someone who had been close to her, someone who might have known things my family didn't want me to discover.
Tom's not answering, Dad muttered, hanging up and immediately trying again. It's Saturday evening. Of course he's not answering. Mom was pacing now, her earlier composure completely gone. This is exactly what Miranda wanted. She knew giving you that deed would force everything into the open. Maybe that's not a bad thing, I say quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, and the look on my parents' faces was pure panic. Samantha, you don't understand what you're saying, Mom said. These people, whoever they are, they want to destroy our family. They want to paint us as criminals who stole from a helpless old woman. But what if you didn't steal anything? What if Grandma Rose really did want to help you, and this investigation proves that? Investigations don't prove innocence, Marcus said darkly. They just drag everything through the mud until everyone looks guilty. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Unknown number, the same one that had just sent the text. Don't answer it, Dad said immediately. But my finger was already hovering over the accept button. What if it's someone who actually knew Grandma? What if they have information that could help you? Or it could be someone fishing for information to use against us, Mom countered. The phone kept ringing. 4 rings, 5, 6. I had to make a decision. I answered. Hello, Samantha. The voice was female, elderly, with a slight tremor that spoke of advanced age. My name is Eleanor Vance. I was your grandmother's closest friend for over 40 years. I put the phone on speaker so my family could hear. Mom's face went white, and Dad sank into his chair like he'd been punched. Mrs. Vance, Mom whispered, but we were told you'd moved to Florida. I did move to Florida, dear, but that doesn't mean I stopped caring about Rose or keeping track of what happened to her family. Eleanor's voice carried a warmth that reminded me painfully of my grandmother. I've been following this investigation from the beginning, and I think it's time Samantha learned the truth about what really happened in those final years. Mrs. Vance, with all due respect, Dad interjected, we're dealing with a legal matter here. Maybe it would be better if you spoke to our attorney. Eleanor's laugh was sharp. Oh, Richard, still trying to control the narrative, I see, just like you did with Rose. The accusation hung in the air like a slap. I could see my father's jaw working, his hands clenched into fists. What do you mean by that? I asked. I mean your grandmother wasn't as confused as your parents would like everyone to believe. She was scared, Samantha. Scared of what would happen to you and Marcus if she didn't help financially, but also scared of what your parents might do if she stopped helping. That's not true, Mom said fiercely. We never pressured her for anything. Didn't you? Then explain to me why Rose called me crying after every one of your visits in those final months. Explain why she was terrified that if she didn't give you money for the restaurant, you'd stop bringing the grandchildren to see her. I felt like I was drowning. The grandmother I remembered was strong, independent, never afraid of anyone. The idea that she'd been frightened or manipulated was almost unbearable. You're lying, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have recordings, Marcus. Voice messages Rose left on my answering machine, asking for advice about what to do. She loved your family, but she felt trapped by your financial needs. Recordings? Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. Rose was old, not stupid. She knew something wasn't right about the pressure she was feeling, so she started documenting it. Phone calls to me, written notes, even some audio recordings on that little device you gave her for her birthday, Samantha. I remembered that gift, a small digital recorder I'd bought so Grandma could record family stories and memories. I'd wanted to preserve her voice, her stories about our family history. I'd never imagined she might have used it to document feeling pressured or afraid. Where are these recordings now? I asked. That's what I'd like to discuss with you, dear. In person. Tomorrow morning, if you're available.
Absolutely not, Mom said immediately. Samantha, you cannot meet with this woman. She's clearly working with whoever filed the complaint against us. Actually, Eleanor said, I'm the one who filed the complaint. The room erupted. Dad started shouting about legal implications. Mom was demanding to know why Eleanor would betray a 40-year friendship, and Marcus was pacing like a caged animal. But all I could focus on was the crushing realization that my grandmother's best friend believed my parents had abused her. Why? I managed to ask over the chaos. Why would you report them if you cared about Grandma? Because Rose asked me to, Eleanor said simply. Not directly, of course. She was too loyal to your family for that. But in those final recordings, she made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure you and Marcus knew the truth about what she'd sacrificed for your family. What truth? My voice was barely audible. That she sold her own retirement investments to give you that money. That she took out a reverse mortgage on her house to fund your father's restaurant expansion. That she was living on Social Security and food pantry donations in her final year because she'd given away everything else to keep your family afloat. I felt like I was going to be sick. That can't be true. She had the house. She seemed comfortable. She had the house because Miranda was secretly paying the property taxes and utilities. Rose was too proud to tell your parents she was broke and too generous to stop giving when you needed help. Dad was shaking his head violently. This is insane. She never said anything about being broke. She insisted on helping us. Of course she insisted, Eleanor said sadly, because she knew that if she couldn't help financially, you'd have less reason to visit, and those visits with you and the children were all she had left. The phone went quiet, except for the sound of my family's ragged breathing. Everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's final years was crumbling around me. I want to see the recordings, I said finally. Samantha, no, Mom pleaded. Please, you have to trust us. This woman is trying to manipulate you. Just like you manipulated Grandma? The words were out before I could stop them, and the look of pain on my mother's face almost made me take them back. Almost. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Eleanor said. The Millbrook Public Library. I'll be in the genealogy section, where Rose and I used to research family histories together. She hung up before anyone could object. I stood up, clutching the property deed that had started this whole nightmare. I'm going to meet her. Samantha, please, Dad said desperately. You're making a mistake. This woman has an agenda. Maybe, but so do you. I headed toward the stairs. I'm going to pack a bag. I'm driving to Millbrook tonight. You can't just leave, Marcus said, jumping up to block my path. We're family. We stick together. I looked at my younger brother, remembering all the times I'd covered for him, helped him with homework, and defended him when he got in trouble. Families don't lie to each other for 5 years about how their grandmother died broke and scared. As I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, I could hear them arguing below, their voices getting more desperate and frantic. But for the first time since I'd opened that wooden jewelry box, I felt like I was moving toward the truth instead of running from it. Even if that truth was going to destroy everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. The drive to Millbrook at 8 in the morning felt surreal. I'd barely slept in the small bed and breakfast I'd found the night before, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The property deed sat on the passenger seat beside me like evidence in a trial I didn't understand. My phone had been buzzing all night with increasingly frantic messages from my family. Dad threatened to call the police if I didn't come home. Mom begged me to reconsider. Marcus sent a string of texts that alternated between anger and desperation. I'd turned off the phone around midnight, needing silence to think. The Millbrook Public Library was a small brick building that looked exactly the same as it had when Grandma Rose used to take me there as a child. I found Eleanor Vance exactly where she'd promised to be, sitting at a corner table in the genealogy section, surrounded by file folders and what looked like an old shoebox. She was smaller than I'd expected, probably in her early 80s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When she saw me, her face broke into a smile that was achingly familiar. You look just like her at your age, she said, standing to embrace me. Rose would have been so proud to see you graduate. I felt tears prick my eyes. Mrs. Vance, I need to know the truth, all of it. I know you do, dear. Sit down. She gestured to the chair across from her. What I'm about to show you isn't going to be easy to hear, but Rose made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure you understood what really happened. She opened the shoebox first, revealing dozens of small cassette tapes, each one labeled with dates spanning the last 3 years of my grandmother's life. Rose started recording these after your father came to her asking for help with the restaurant loan. She was worried about making such a big financial decision, so she wanted to document her thoughts and feelings about it. Eleanor picked up one of the tapes, dated about 2 years before Grandma's death. This one was recorded the day after your parents first asked for help with Marcus's college tuition. She pressed play on a small cassette player, and suddenly my grandmother's voice filled the space between us. I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Eleanor, it's Rose. I don't know what to do. Richard and Linda came by today, and they looked so worried about Marcus's future. They said they'd been denied student loans because of the restaurant debt, and they didn't know how they were going to afford tuition. Linda was crying, Eleanor, actually crying. I've never seen her like that. My grandmother's voice paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. But $25,000, that's most of what I have left in savings. If I give them this money, I'll have to be very careful about my own expenses. Maybe I should talk to Miranda first, get her opinion. Eleanor stopped the tape. She never did talk to Miranda about it. Your parents convinced her it should stay between family. That doesn't sound like they were pressuring her, I said weakly. It sounds like she wanted to help. Listen to this one. Eleanor picked up a tape 6 months later.
This time, my grandmother's voice sounded tired, strained. They're back again, Eleanor. Richard says the restaurant expansion is behind schedule and over budget. He needs another $15,000, or they might lose everything they've already invested. He keeps saying how this will secure Marcus and Samantha's futures, how the restaurant will be something to pass down to the grandchildren. Another pause, longer this time. I've already given them $40,000, Eleanor. My savings account is almost empty. But Richard says this is an investment in the family's future. He promised they'd pay me back once the expansion is profitable. And Linda, she hugged me so tight when I said yes. She said I was saving their family. Eleanor fast-forwarded through several more tapes, stopping at one labeled just 3 months before Grandma Rose died. Eleanor, I'm scared. My grandmother's voice was barely above a whisper. I got another bill from the heating company, and I don't have enough in checking to cover it. I've been keeping the heat at 55 degrees, wearing sweaters to bed, but the bill is still $200. My hand flew to my mouth. I remembered visiting during that time, wondering why Grandma always seemed cold, why she was wearing so many layers even inside the house. I can't ask Richard and Linda for help. They're still struggling with the restaurant, and Marcus's tuition is due again next semester. They don't know I'm having trouble. I haven't told them about the reverse mortgage or that I've been shopping at the food pantry twice a week. The tape continued, and my grandmother's voice grew even quieter. Miranda called yesterday, asking if I needed anything. I wanted to tell her the truth, but I'm too ashamed. How do I explain that I gave away my retirement savings? How do I tell her that I'm house rich but cash poor, and I'm too proud to admit it to my own family? Eleanor stopped the player. There are 18 more tapes like this, Samantha. 18 recordings of your grandmother struggling to pay basic bills while your parents came to her for more money. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as I thought about my independent, proud grandmother secretly suffering while my family celebrated restaurant expansions and college acceptance letters. Why didn't she just say no? Why didn't she tell them she couldn't afford it? Eleanor opened one of the file folders, revealing bank statements and financial documents. Because every time she hesitated, your parents would bring you or Marcus with them. They'd talk about your futures, your education, your dreams.
They made her believe that saying no to them meant failing as a grandmother. She handed me a handwritten note in my grandmother's familiar script. This was tucked inside her Bible when I cleaned out her house after the funeral. The note was dated just 2 weeks before Grandma Rose died. I've given everything I can to secure my grandchildren's futures. I pray I've made the right choices. If anything happens to me, I hope they'll understand that every sacrifice was made out of love. But I also hope they'll understand the true cost of those sacrifices. The true cost, I whispered. Your grandmother died with less than $300 in her bank account, Eleanor said gently. She owed money on credit cards she'd used to buy groceries. The only reason she didn't lose the house was because Miranda had been secretly paying the property taxes for the last year of her life. The weight of this revelation was crushing. All those years of believing my parents were financially stable, that the restaurant was successful, that Marcus's college was fully funded, it had all been built on my grandmother's sacrifices. But why didn't Miranda say something sooner? Why wait until now? Eleanor smiled sadly. Because Miranda promised Rose she wouldn't interfere while she was alive. Rose made her swear not to cause family conflict. But after Rose died, when Miranda found out about the financial records, she was devastated. She tried to approach her parents privately to discuss setting up some kind of memorial fund or paying back what Rose had given. That's when your parents accused her of being jealous and greedy. And that's when they stopped speaking? Miranda waited 5 years, hoping your parents would eventually do the right thing. When it became clear they never would, she filed the complaint with the state, not to punish them, but to make sure Rose's story was told. Eleanor reached across the table and took my hands. The deed she gave you yesterday, that house was Rose's safety net. She put it in joint ownership with Miranda specifically so that if she ever ran out of money, she'd have a place to live. Your grandmother wanted to give it to you because she felt guilty about not being able to leave you any money. I looked down at the deed that had started this whole journey. So Miranda is giving it to me now? Is her way of honoring Rose's wishes while also making sure you understand what your grandmother gave up for your family. The power dynamic in my family had just shifted completely. I wasn't the naive college graduate who needed protecting from complicated legal matters. I was the granddaughter of a woman who had sacrificed everything for people who had never even known she was suffering. And now, I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. There's one more thing, Eleanor said, opening the final folder. Rose left specific instructions about what should happen if the truth ever came out. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in my grandmother's handwriting. Inside was a letter that would change everything. My hands trembled as I opened the sealed envelope. The letter inside was written on my grandmother's personal stationery, the kind with small roses embossed at the top that she'd used for special occasions. My dearest Samantha, it began. If you're reading this, it means Eleanor has shared the truth about what happened in my final years. I know this must be overwhelming, and I'm sorry you've had to learn about it this way. I pause, looking up at Eleanor, who was watching me with gentle concern. She wrote this just days before she died, Eleanor explained. She had a feeling her time was coming, and she wanted to make sure you had guidance if the truth ever came out. I continued reading. I don't want you to hate your parents, sweetheart. They never meant to hurt me, and I never told them how difficult their requests had become. They were desperate, trying to save their business and secure their children's futures. In their position, I might have made the same choices.
The letter went on. But I also need you to understand that their financial stability was built on my sacrifice. The restaurant, Marcus's education, your college fund, all of it came from money I couldn't really afford to give. I gave it anyway because I love our family, but love shouldn't require someone to suffer in silence. My phone rang, interrupting my reading. It was Marcus. Sam, where are you? Mom and Dad are freaking out. They drove to Millbrook looking for you. I'm at the library with Eleanor Vance. The woman who's trying to destroy our family? Sam, please, just come home. We can work this out together. I looked at Eleanor, then back at the letter in my hands. Marcus, did you know Grandma was struggling financially before she died? A long pause. What do you mean? Did you know she was shopping at food pantries? Did you know she was keeping her heat at 55 degrees to save money? Did you know Miranda was secretly paying her property taxes? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Marcus? No, I didn't know any of that. His voice was small, younger sounding than I'd heard in years. Are you sure? Maybe this Eleanor woman is lying. I've heard recordings, Marcus, Grandma's own voice, talking about how scared she was, how broke she was. She gave us everything, and we never even noticed she was suffering. Another long pause. What do you want me to tell Mom and Dad? I looked at the final paragraph of the letter. If this truth comes to light, I want you to remember that you have choices, Samantha. You can choose to let this knowledge destroy your family, or you can choose to use it to build something better. The house I've left you is a symbol of those choices. It can be a refuge from family conflict, or it can be a foundation for healing. The decision is yours. Tell them I'll meet them at the house in Millbrook. The address is 247 Maple Creek Lane. Tell them it's time we all told the truth. I hung up and finished reading the letter. The final lines brought fresh tears to my eyes. You were always the strongest one in the family, even as a little girl. You stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I'm counting on that strength now. Use it wisely, with love, but also with justice. Your loving grandmother, Rose. Eleanor had been quietly organizing the evidence while I read. What are you going to do? I'm going to that house, and I'm going to make them face what they did. Would you like me to come with you for moral support? I considered it, but this felt like something I needed to handle alone. Thank you, but this is a family matter now. A family that needs to learn how to tell each other the truth. The drive to 247 Maple Creek Lane took 20 minutes through winding country roads. The house was smaller than I'd expected, a charming 2-story cottage with a wraparound porch and overgrown gardens that spoke of years of neglect. My parents' car was already in the driveway when I arrived. I found them on the front porch, huddled together like refugees waiting for shelter. Mom's eyes were red from crying, and Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Marcus was sitting on the porch steps, staring at his hands. Samantha, Mom said, standing up as I approached, "Thank God you're okay. We've been so worried." "Have you been inside yet?" I asked, holding up the key Eleanor had given me. "We didn't think we should," Dad said. "This is your house now." The admission hung in the air. No arguments about legal complications or family ownership, just acceptance that this was mine, the way it should have been 5 years ago. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled like lavender and old wood, and despite years of emptiness, it felt warm and welcoming. My family followed me into the small living room, where dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. "She decorated it for us," Mom whispered, looking around at the family photos on the mantelpiece, the handmade quilts draped over the furniture. "Look, there's your school picture from senior year, and Marcus's graduation photo." I set the box of evidence Eleanor had given me on the coffee table. "Before we talk about the house, there are some things you need to hear." For the next hour, I played selected recordings for my family. I showed them the financial documents, the bank statements, and the credit card bills. I read portions of my grandmother's letter. With each piece of evidence, I watched my parents' defenses crumble. Mom was crying openly by the time I finished. "We didn't know. Samantha, I swear to you, we had no idea she was struggling." "But you knew she was giving you more money than most people her age could afford," I said. "You knew the amounts were substantial. Didn't you ever wonder where it was coming from?" Dad ran his hands through his hair. "She always made it seem like the money wasn't a big deal. She said she was happy to help, that it was what family did for each other." "And when Miranda tried to talk to you about it after the funeral?" "Miranda was angry," Mom said defensively. "She accused us of manipulating an elderly woman. She said terrible things about our motives." What if she was right? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus was the first to respond. "She was right." His voice was barely audible.
Maybe not about our motives, but about the result. We took money from a woman who couldn't afford to give it, and we never even checked to make sure she was okay. We were desperate, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. The restaurant was failing. Marcus's tuition was due. We had bill collectors calling every day. So was Grandma, I said firmly. She was desperate too, but she suffered in silence because she loved us too much to say no. Mom collapsed into one of the armchairs. What do we do now? How do we fix this? I sat down across from her, my grandmother's final letter still in my hands. We start by acknowledging what really happened. No more pretending that Grandma was financially comfortable. No more acting like Miranda was the problem. We own the truth about what our financial stability cost her. And then what? Marcus asked. Then we figure out how to honor her memory properly. The investigation is going to continue, whether we cooperate or not. Eleanor has enough evidence to prove that Grandma died broke because of the money she gave us. We can either fight that reality and look like we're still trying to cover things up, or we can admit what happened and try to make it right. Dad leaned forward. What does making it right look like? I thought about my grandmother's words, about choices, about using this knowledge to build something better instead of destroying what remained of our family. It looks like paying back what we owe her estate. It looks like setting up a memorial fund in her name to help other elderly people who might be facing financial pressure from family members. It looks like never again accepting help without making sure the person giving it can truly afford it. We don't have $200,000 to pay back, Dad said. Then we sell the restaurant. We downsize. We make sacrifices, the way she did. I met each of their eyes in turn. We stop building our success on someone else's suffering. The room was quiet, except for the sound of Mom's soft crying. Finally, Marcus spoke up. The house should stay yours, Sam. Grandma wanted you to have choices, and this place represents that. But maybe the rest of us need to figure out how to make better choices too.
I looked around at my family, flawed, desperate, but not malicious. They'd made terrible decisions, but they'd made them out of love and fear, not greed. My grandmother had understood that, even as she'd suffered from the consequences. We're going to cooperate fully with the investigation, I said. We're going to tell the truth about what happened, and we're going to spend whatever time we have left making sure Grandma's sacrifices meant something. As the sun set through the cottage windows, my family began the hardest conversation we'd ever had, about truth, about consequences, and about what it really means to love someone enough to let them go. 6 months later, I stood in the same cottage living room, but everything had changed. The dust was gone, the windows were clean, and fresh flowers from the restored garden sat in a vase on the mantelpiece. More importantly, the heavy weight of family secrets that had hung over us for years was finally gone. The investigation had concluded 3 weeks ago. True to our word, my family had cooperated fully with the state's inquiry. We'd provided all the financial records, admitted to the full scope of the money transfers, and explained the circumstances that had led to them. The final report concluded that while no criminal activity had occurred, there had been a pattern of financial dependency that had placed undue burden on an elderly family member. More significantly, the report had led to new state guidelines about recognizing signs of unintentional elder financial abuse, situations where family members accept help without realizing the true cost to their elderly relatives. Eleanor had worked with the state to develop educational materials, and my grandmother's story, anonymous but powerful, was helping other families recognize warning signs before it was too late. The cottage had become my weekend retreat and my base for a new project I'd started with Eleanor's help. We'd established the Rose Brennan Foundation for Elder Financial Wellness, funded partially by the settlement my family had agreed to pay back to my grandmother's estate. It wasn't the full $200,000, that would have bankrupted my parents completely, but it was a significant amount that demonstrated our commitment to making things right. My father had sold the restaurant to his business partner and taken a job as a manager at a smaller establishment. The pay was less, but the stress was manageable, and he discovered he actually enjoyed cooking more than running a business.
Mom had gone back to school to become a certified elder care advocate, using her experience to help other families navigate the complex emotions around accepting help from aging relatives. Marcus had transferred to a state school to reduce his tuition costs and taken on a part-time job. The transition had been difficult, but he'd surprised everyone by thriving in the more challenging environment. He'd also become one of the foundation's most effective volunteers, speaking to college students about recognizing when family financial help comes at too high a cost. The cottage door opened, and Miranda walked in carrying a box of old photo albums. Our relationship had been tentative at first. Years of family estrangement don't heal overnight, but working together on the foundation had helped us rebuild the connection that had been damaged by secrets and misunderstandings. "I found these in Mother's storage unit," she said, setting the box on the coffee table. "I thought you might want to go through them for the memorial exhibition." Next month marked the 5-year anniversary of Grandma Rose's death, and we were planning a community event to launch the foundation publicly. The local historical society had agreed to host an exhibition about her life, focusing not just on her generosity, but on the importance of protecting elderly people from unintentional financial exploitation. I opened the box and smiled at the familiar sight of my grandmother's meticulous photo organization. Each album was labeled by year, with little notes in her careful handwriting identifying people and occasions. But at the bottom of the box was something I'd never seen before: a small leather journal with family thoughts embossed on the cover. "Did you know about this?" I asked Miranda. She shook her head, moving closer as I opened the journal. The entries were dated throughout the last 5 years of Grandma's life, and reading them was like hearing her voice again. March 15th. Richard asked for help with the restaurant loan today. I can see how worried he is about providing for his family. The amount seems large, but if it helps them build something lasting for Samantha and Marcus, it's worth it. September 8th. Linda was so grateful when I offered to help with Marcus's tuition. She cried and said I was saving his future. It feels good to know my savings can make such a difference in my grandchildren's lives. But as the entries continued, the tone began to change. January 12th. Another request for restaurant expenses. I'm starting to worry about my own finances, but I can't bear to see them struggle. Maybe I should talk to Miranda about this. April 3rd. I didn't tell them I had to use my credit card for groceries this month. They have enough worries without adding mine to the list. August 19th. Miranda offered to help with the property taxes, and I was too embarrassed to refuse. I've become the kind of person who needs help instead of giving it. But I can't regret helping my family, even if it's made things difficult for me. The final entry was dated just a week before she died. I've given everything I had to give, and I don't regret it. But I hope someday my family understands that love shouldn't require someone
to struggle in silence. I hope they learn to ask for help before they're desperate, and to give help only when they can truly afford it. I closed the journal, tears in my eyes. Even in her private thoughts, my grandmother had been more concerned about our well-being than her own suffering. "She really didn't blame us," I said softly. "No," Miranda agreed, "but she hoped we'd learn from what happened, and I think we have." The cottage door opened again, and my parents walked in with Eleanor, who had become an unexpected but treasured friend to our entire family. They were carrying supplies for the memorial exhibition planning meeting we'd scheduled for this afternoon. "How are the photo albums coming?" Mom asked, setting down a box of display materials. "We found Grandma's private journal," I said, showing them the leather book. "Want to hear what she really thought about everything?" Over the next hour, we read through the journal together, crying and laughing and marveling at my grandmother's grace even in difficult circumstances. The entries painted a picture of a woman who had chosen sacrifice out of love, but who had also hoped her family would learn to make better choices in the future. "She would have loved this," Dad said, gesturing around the cottage that had become the foundation's headquarters, knowing that her story was helping other families. Eleanor nodded. "Rose always said that the best way to honor someone's sacrifice was to make sure it led to positive change. This foundation is exactly what she would have wanted." As the afternoon wore on, we finalized plans for the memorial exhibition. There would be displays about recognizing elder financial abuse, resources for families facing financial crises, and information about having honest conversations about money and care as parents age. But there would also be a celebration of my grandmother's life, her kindness, her strength, and her unwavering love for her family. The cottage had taught me something important about legacy. It wasn't just about what someone leaves behind in terms of money or property. It was about the lessons they pass on, the changes they inspire, and the healing they make possible even after they're gone. My phone buzzed with a text from my new supervisor at the environmental consulting firm. I'd been promoted to project manager after successfully navigating my first major assignment, implementing sustainable practices at a senior living facility. The job had come about because of my work with the foundation, and it felt like the perfect combination of my professional skills and my personal mission. "Good news?" Marcus asked, noticing my smile. "The Morrison Senior Center project got approved for Phase 2. We're going to be able to implement financial counseling services alongside the environmental improvements." It was exactly the kind of integrated approach my grandmother would have appreciated, addressing both physical and financial wellness for elderly people who might otherwise fall through the cracks. As the sun began to set through the cottage windows, painting everything in golden light, I looked around at my family. We were different people than we'd been 6 months ago. The secrets and shame that had divided us were gone, replaced by a shared commitment to honoring my grandmother's memory through positive action. The property deed that had started this journey was now framed on the cottage wall, not as a symbol of inheritance, but as a reminder of choices. My grandmother had chosen to sacrifice for our futures. Miranda had chosen to reveal the truth instead of letting resentment fester. My parents had chosen to take responsibility instead of denying their role. Marcus had chosen to change his path rather than continue benefiting from someone else's sacrifice. And I had chosen to use my newfound independence not to escape my family's mistakes, but to help ensure they never happened again. The cottage had become exactly what my grandmother had hoped it would be. Not a refuge from family conflict, but a foundation for healing. A place where difficult truths could be told and heard, where love could coexist with accountability, and where the next generation could learn to make better choices. As my family gathered around the fireplace to plan our grandmother's memorial celebration, I felt her presence in the room, not as a ghost haunting our mistakes, but as a guide helping us build something better from the lessons her sacrifice had taught us. The Rose Brennan Foundation would help other families avoid the pain we'd experienced. The cottage would continue to serve as a reminder that love requires both generosity and wisdom. And my grandmother's legacy would live on not in the money she'd given away, but in the changes her story had inspired. For the first time since graduation day, I felt truly ready for the future. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.